Hello, wine lovers! I am Yaroslava, sommelier and wine educator, your guide on this journey through a world of wines, spirits, and cocktails. Prosecco is an Italian white wine produced in 9 provinces across the Veneto and Friuli Venezia Giulia regions. It's made primarily from the Glera grape, although up to 15% of our permitted grape varieties can be blended in. Prosecco comes in 3 styles: sparkling spumante, semi-sparkling frizzante, and still tranquillo. Both spumante and frizzante Prosecco are typically made using the Charmat method. That's the formal definition of Prosecco. Today, Prosecco is the most popular sparkling wine in the world. In 2024, 660 million bottles were produced, more than champagne and cava combined. However, Prosecco's global popularity is a relatively recent phenomenon, rising in the first decade of the 21st century. What drove its success? A worldwide search of interest in sparkling wines, Prosecco's affordability thanks to its production method, its light and easygoing taste, the popularity of the Aperol Spritz cocktail, which used Prosecco as a base, the broad appeal of the Italian lifestyle, summed up the idea of La Dolce Vita, the sweet life, and finally, a powerful marketing move by the Italians who capitalized on Prosecco's growing fame. But let's take it step by step. The Glera grape has been cultivated in the northeastern Italy since at least Roman times. It is believed that the wine Pliny the Elder referred to in his natural history as Vinum Puccinum was made from this very grape. The name Glera, however, is quite recent. It was only officially adopted in 2009. Before that, the grape itself was called Prosecco. It is believed that the name came from the village of Prosecco near Trieste, which may have been the grape's original home. Or perhaps not, because for centuries no grape had been grown near the village at all. The village sits on the border with Slovenia, and across the border the grape is still grown in small quantities for sweet wine called Prosek. Most Prosecco, however, has long been produced in Veneto, especially in the Canigliano Valdobbiadene region. At first, still wine was made from Glera, and later sparkling wine. With its natural high acidity and neutral taste, Glera is well suited to sparkling wine production. When the Charmat Martinotti method for making sparkling wine was developed in the late 19th century, a method much simpler and cheaper than the traditional one used for champagne, Prosecco producers quickly embraced it. Over time, Prosecco transitioned almost entirely into the sparkling category. Today, still wine makes up less than 1% of total production, at Israeli release Italy. At the turn of the 21st century, Prosecco caught the attention of the British and later the Americans as the more affordable alternative to champagne. Demand began to rise quickly. As of 2008, the grape was still called Prosecco, and there were 4 small historical DOC regions in Italy where Prosecco was officially produced: Prosecco di Canigliano Valdobbiadene, Prosecco di Canigliano, Prosecco di Valdobbiadene, and Prosecco di Colli Salani. DOC, Denominazione di Origine Controllata, and DOCG, Denominazione di Origine Controllata e Garantita, are Italy's version of a European PDO status, Protected Destination of Origin. You can find detailed information about what it means and why it's matter in my other video. The link is the first comment. In Italy, the appellation system was introduced in 1963, and at first, all recognized regions were simply called DOC. Just to remind you, the appellation is a historically defined and officially recognized wine-growing area with a specific set of rules for how the wine is produced. Belonging to an appellation serves as a kind of quality guarantee. A while after the system was introduced, many Italian winemakers began to feel the DCO status was being handed out too freely. In response, Italy introduced a higher level designation in 1980, DOCG, the highest classification for Italian wines. Now back to Prosecco. By 2008, global interest in Prosecco had grown significantly. However, by that time, other countries had also begun planting the grape. Prosecco wines were being cultivated in Australia, Brazil, Argentina, and several others. With sparkling Prosecco gaining popularity worldwide, Italy decided to secure exclusive rights to the name Prosecco. But there was a problem. Under EU regulation, PDO status cannot be granted to a grape variety. So, in 2009, Italy officially renamed the grape to Glera. From that point on, the word Prosecco could only be used to refer to the wines made from the Glera grape grown within the designated DOC Prosecco territory. At the same time, the production area was significantly expanded. While the traditional Caligliano-Valdobbiadene region spanned about 40 kilometers, the new DOC Prosecco area stretched over 250 kilometers. This expansion had two main goals. First, to include the village of Prosecco, located on the eastern edge of the region, because now that the grape was called Glera, something in the DOC zone needed to provide the wine's name. Second, to increase the amount of land produced with profitable bubbles. However, it is important to remember that the historical regions where Glera had long been grown are hilly, with vines planted on the steep slopes, conditions that naturally produce better quality grapes. By contrast, much of the expanded DOC territory is flat, and the grapes grown there tend to be of a different, generally lower quality. To acknowledge this difference, the traditional heartland of Prosecco was evaluated to DCG status, signifying that these areas produced Prosecco of particularly higher quality. And in 2019, the hills on Canigliano and Valdobbiadene, Le Colline del Prosecco di Canigliano e Valdobbiadene, were awarded UNESCO World Heritage status for their vital role in production of Prosecco. Now Italy just needs to convince other countries to stop producing wines labeled Prosecco. New Zealand has already agreed, but Australia is still unwilling to give up its position. That said, the issue is not especially crucial. Italy already grows 98% of the world's Glera grapes. Interestingly, about 80% of all Prosecco is exported. More than half of it goes to Europe and about a quarter to the United States. But within Italy itself, Prosecco tends to stay close to home. Around half of it's consumed in the northeast, right where it's produced, and another quarter in the neighboring northwest. So, let's take a closer look of what Prosecco is made from, how it's produced, and where it comes from today. The main grape variety is Glera. Its variantal characteristics include medium to high acidity, low aromatic intensity, and simple, straightforward taste. The dominant aromas are green apple, melon, and pear. The resulting wine is light with relatively low alcohol. 8.5% is the minimal allowed for Prosecco. Forwards typically range from 11 to 11.5%. In general, the minimal alcohol content depends on the region, and even within a region it varies from wine type. For example, in Canigliano Valdobbiadene, the minimum alcohol levels in 10.5% for still wine, 11 for Spumante Superior, and 11.5 for wines from designated subzones. It's also worth noting that Glera isn't a single clone grape, but a group of relatively sub-varieties. The main ones are Glera Lunga, Glera Tonda, and Glera Nostrana. According to the Italian wine regulation, Prosecco, Prosecco Spumante, and Prosecco Frizzante must contain at least 85% Glera. The remaining 15% can include any combination of the following grapes: Verdizza, Pancetta di Viggiana, Pereira, Chardonnay, Pinot Bianco, Pinot Grigio, and Pinot Noir. Although Pinot Noir must be processed using the white winemaking techniques. Since 2020, Prosecco Rosé has also been officially produced. It must be made from Glera and 10-50% Pinot Noir, with the Pinot Noir vinified using red white techniques. Most Prosecco is made using the Charmat method, also known as the Charmat-Martinotti method, the Tank method, or simply the Italian method. This differs from the traditional method used for champagne and other premium sparkling wines, where the secondary fermentation, responsible for creating the bubbles, occurs in the bottle. I explain this traditional method in detail in my video about champagne. The traditional method is labor-extensive and therefore more expensive. It's also important to note that this method does not just generate bubbles, it also allows the wine to mature on its leaf, the sediment, which enhance complexity and depth of flavor. At the end of the 19th century, Italian winemaker Federico Martinotti began exploring ways to make sparkling wine production cheaper and more efficient. In 1895, he invented and patented the method that now bears his name. Later, in 1907, the Frenchman Eugène Charmat refined and repatented the process. That's why today the method is often referred to as the Sharma-Martinotti method. One of its name, the tank method, perfectly captures the essence of a process. Secondary fermentation takes place in a large sealed stainless steel tank or autoclave under controlled temperature. Baseline is poured into this tank when yeast and sugar are added. The yeast ferments the sugar into alcohol and carbon dioxide. Once fermentation is complete, the wine is chilled, filtered and bottled under pressure. The longer the fermentation, the smaller and more refined are the bubbles, and the better the resulting wine. For Prosecco, the minimum fermentation time is 30 days. Most producers stick to this minimum, but a few, who aim to higher quality, extend fermentation to several months, sometimes up to 9 months. These longer fermented wines are labeled Sharma Lunga. There are also some producers who carry out both primary and secondary fermentation in the same autoclave, rather than using separate tanks. This can enhance the fruity character of the wine. Still, no matter the variation, the Sharma method does not allow the prolonged aging only on the sediment, as it done in traditional bottled fermented sparkling wines, which limit complexity but keep production efficient. The result? Inexpensive, accessible sparkling wine with a light, straightforward profile. In essence, they are base wine infused with carbon dioxide through controlled fermentation. The Sharma method is now widely used in Italy, the United States and Germany. 4 of high-end sparkling wines in both countries are still made using the traditional method. Return to Prosecco. All Prosecco Spumante DOCG is made using the Sharma method. In DOCG zones, producers are permitted to use either the Sharma or the traditional method, which in Italy is known as Metoda Classica. However, very few actually choose the traditional route, and it's easy to understand why. The production cost is much higher, and very few customers even notice, let alone value, the small print Metoda Classica on the Prosecco label. After all, most people assume Prosecco is made by the Sharma method by default. In addition to the Sharma method, and now rarely used traditional method, a small quantity of Prosecco, typically frizzante, is made using the ancestral method. In Italy, this style is called col-fondo, meaning with the bottom, a reference to the sediment that settle at the base of the bottle. Like the traditional method, secondary fermentation occurs in the bottle, but unlike champagne or other traditional sparkling wines, the sediment is not removed. In ancient process dating back to at least 9th century, one predates both the traditional and Sharma method. The resulting wines are dry, aromatic, and offer a more complex rustic profile than modern Prosecco. Until 2022, these wines were labeled as col-fondo or refermentata in bottiglia, refermented in the bottle. Since 2022, the official labeling terms is suavity, meaning on the lees, which clearly indicates the wine has been aged on the yeast sediment. While this style makes up only a tiny fraction of the total Prosecco production, about 30 producers currently craft it, is gaining attention, with production growing and some export already underway. So, today, Prosecco can be divided into 3 main styles by method of production. The Sharma method, the vast majority of Prosecco, Suiavity, made using the ancestral method, and by traditional method, Metoda Classica, rare and niche. By furnaces, Prosecco is divided into Spumante, sparkling, pressure above 3 atmospheres, Frizzante, semi-sparkling, pressure from 1 to 2.5 atmospheres, and still. For comparison, sparkling wine like champagne, cava, and crema, which are made using the traditional method, typically reach 5-6 atmospheres. Prosecco, made mostly by the Sharma method, usually has slightly lower pressure, around 3-4 atmospheres. A word of caution: due to this lower pressure, subrush, opening the bottle with a sword, is not recommended for Prosecco, especially if you are not sure about exact internal pressure. Frizzante Prosecco, including most suavity wines, can be made either by the ancestral or Sharma method, but always with lower pressure. In terms of volume, Spumante accounts for about 88% of all Prosecco. Frizzante makes up around 12%. Still Prosecco, exceedingly rare, less than 1%. Prosecco is also categorized by sweetness, using the modern EU scale for sparkling wines. Extra nature, 0 to 3 gram per liter. Extra brut, 0 to 6 gram per liter. Brut, 0 to 12 gram per liter. Extra brut 12 to 17. Dry 17 to 32. Demi-sec 32 to 15 gram per liter of sugar. Traditionally, extra dry has been the most commonly produced Prosecco. However, in recent years, dry style, particularly brut and extra brut, have been gaining ground. Demi-sec Prosecco is quite rare, and the sweetest category over 50 gram per liter is not produced at all. Levels of quality and places of production. Prosecco DOC. This is the basic level of Prosecco, and it can be produced across the wide area of northeastern Italy. While some wines at these levels are pleasant, the majority are simple and unremarkable. Prosecco Trieste DOC and Prosecco Treviso DOC. These are two small DOC subregions. Formally, they carry the same classification as standard Prosecco DOC, but in practice, the quality is often a little higher. Trieste DOC is a small region in the far east of Friuli, Venezia Giulia, near the village of Prosecco, where the grape and wine originally got their name. Treviso DOC is in the Veneto region and represents the historic heartland of Prosecco production. Within its boundaries lie the areas designated for the highest classification, DOCG. Conegliano Valdobbiadene Prosecco Superiore DOCG. This hilly region within Treviso is considered the core of quality Prosecco production. Along with Asolo Prosecco DOCG, it represents the highest level of classification, with the strictest quality regulation. If you are seeking verified and expressive Prosecco, DOCG wines are where to look. Tiny but exceptional San Appellation. Conegliano Valdobbiadene Prosecco Superiore Rivi DOCG. Represents about 2.5% of production. Rivi wines are made from the grapes grown on steep single hillside, with each bottle labeled by the name of specific village or vineyard. Valdobbiadene Superiore Galartisi DOCG, even smaller and around 1.5% of production. This micro area produces the most prestigious and often more expensive Prosecco. Interestingly, the name doesn't include the word Prosecco, and it doesn't require the label, in our subtle indication for its uniqueness. At this point, a thought creeps into my mind. With the global expansion of mass producing of a mediocre Prosecco, will we see quality producers in the DOC zones drop the Prosecco name altogether to protect their identity, much like Spencer peanut producers did when they left the Cava d'Oro? It would not be surprising, considering how broad the gap in quality has become. Asolo Prosecco DOCG. The small DOCG region also imposes strict quality control. It is especially known for producing drier style of Prosecco. While lesser known than Conegliano Valdobbiadene, wines of Asolo DOCG can offer excellent value and elegance. A quick guide: what to choose. For quality and complexity, choose wines labeled DOCG. For cocktails, DOC level Prosecco is sufficient, as the wine's character will be masked by mixers. Very cheap Prosecco in cans, best avoided. By the way, in Italy, Prosecco must be sold in glass bottles. Canned version is only legal for export. In 2006, Paris Hilton promoted canned Prosecco rich for Austrian brand. The campaign causes the uproar among winemakers in Conegliano Valdobbiadene, who saw it as a degradation of the wine's image. I can understand them. Sales were strong, but it's fair to ask how many of Hilton's fans are the true wine lovers. Practical notes. Prosecco does not age well. It's best consumed within the first year. In any cases, no older than 3 years from the bottling. Ideal serving temperature 37 degrees centigrade, 38-45 Fahrenheit, well chilled. Enjoy Prosecco on its own as a refreshing aperitif, in cocktails like Aperol Spritz, Mimosa and Bellini, with light appetizer, seafood and delicate fish dishes. I have today Asolo Prosecco Superiore Via Antica. Appellation DOCG Asolo Prosecco. It comes from the small hilly region where Prosecco was made before the 1989 changes. Let's try. This one for you. This one for me. 9 bubbles for Prosecco. 4 aroma. Ripe pears and lemons. Good Prosecco. Stay with me, subscribe to my channel. Feel free to ask questions and don't hesitate to support me. Salute!